Now, Senator Bernie Sanders now has a plan to get money out of politics. So now this is really interesting. I've always said before that if you don't have a plan to get money out of politics, then you don't have a plan to get the Green New Deal. Then you don't have a plan to fight against the interests, who will make it so that you basically can't get Medicare for all passed through Congress, because right now big corporations, health insurance companies, a lot of money, both mostly Democrats, Republicans as well, to try to prevent any changes to our for-profit health insurance system. So if you don't get the money out, then you're not going to move forward on any of these progressive issues. And I've talked about this for years on this show. So now Bernie Sanders' plan, it's got to be pretty big. It's got to be pretty bold in order to actually achieve this, to achieve the result of being able to get these policies passed. Now, does this plan do that? Well, let's talk about some of the parts in this plan and we'll see. So now Bernie Sanders would start by replacing the Federal Election Commission, right? So now the FEC is basically a joke, right? So now you have both Democrats and Republican members, and let's be honest, mostly Republican members that don't really want to do anything to enforce campaign finance law. So you have Republican deadlock. Again, these Republicans don't believe in any campaign finance restrictions. They think, no, we shouldn't go after anybody for giving any amount of money to candidates, because those people happen to be our donors. Those happen to be people that believe in what we believe in: conservative economic, tax cuts for the rich, deregulation for corporations. So of course we're not going to go after anybody. We're not going to restrict money in politics at all. So again, they're essentially a joke. Now, the one thing they won't do is apparently let foreign financing in elections go, which I think is the least that we can, the smallest thing that we can give them credit for, right? So now, if you're going to enforce the law, any mechanism that you put into place has to have some sort of teeth, has to be nonpartisan, right? So now, does this plan do that? Well, Bernie Sanders is taking some inspiration from former Senator John McCain and Russ Feingold. So they got together, um, and this is, of course, after McCain was caught with huge corruption, right? Personal corruption when it comes to money in politics. He turns around and suddenly becomes a crusader against that kind of corruption. So that's good, right? So now this plan was proposed by McCain and Feingold and would create the Federal Election Administration. So now it would be made up of about 3 members with legal backgrounds who served terms long enough to ensure that no president could appoint the entire committee at one time. Okay, so it's kind of like what we have with the FEC, right? A little bit. So now the FEA would also have the power to pursue not only civil penalties, but also criminal charges against those violating campaign finance laws. So now that's a big difference as well. We have criminal penalties as well as civil penalties if you break campaign finance law. That means it's got some teeth. Okay, great. So what else? The FEA sounds like you're off to a good start, but there are bigger problems here when it comes to campaign financing itself, the whole framework. The fact that corporations have speech rights in elections, that they are considered to be people. Well, Bernie Sanders, the biggest part of this is proposing a constitutional amendment that, quote, makes clear money is not speech and corporations are not people. So it would overturn 2 Supreme Court decisions, Bellotti versus First Bank. That's one of them. Um, and I can never remember the other one. Apologies for that. But again, one made corporations people, and the other made money speech, right? So you combine those together. Corporations are people with unlimited speech rights, and that leads, of course, the way to Citizens United, which says that, hey, man, look, if you've got if corporations are people and money is speech, well, then if you're limiting campaign contributions of any kind, then you are limiting free speech. And so that's the rationale for that argument, right? But by saying corporations are not people, money is not speech, well, then that undermines the entire case behind Citizens United. And so that would do a lot to eliminate money in politics. Now, that's not the only thing. Again, that constitutional amendment, that is already huge. And he's going to push for that. And I think that's great. Again, you would need, I believe, 2/3 of Congress to ratify that, to go to the Constitutional Convention, and it would be a huge, huge path, right? But there's also more to it than just relying on the constitutional amendment. His proposal would also abolish all corporate giving to presidential inaugurations to prevent, of course, that kind of corruption, as well as cap individual donations to $500. So no large independent donors, right? So right now, the campaign finance limit for an individual is about $2,800. He's reduced that down to $500. All right, but there's more. How to replace all that money? That's the question, right? Campaigns need to raise money. They need to spend money. They run ads. I get it, right? Well, Sanders would replace this with public financing. Now, the plan would call for universal small dollar vouchers that would give any voting age American the ability to donate to federal candidates. So it kind of like sounds a little bit like Yang's idea of democracy dollars, which, of course, the rich and powerful pundits on TV, they all laugh at. But in reality, it's actually a pretty good system. You take your voucher and you say, I like this candidate because of their position on A or X or whatever. And so I'm going to give my, public financing money to that candidate because I believe in their message. Okay, that's great. Wonderful. So now you already have a new, basically enforcement arm of the government, the FEA, to replace the FEC, then a ban on corporate donations, and then you have a $500 individual limit, and then you follow that up with actual public financing. So you get all those things together, and already it sounds incredibly strong. But wait, there's another thing that Sanders tackles in this bill, which I think is really interesting. And in it, he specifically goes after the DNC. Now, the DNC takes corporate money, and so they get corporate donations. They're a fund, like they're the Democratic National Committee. It's a group that schedules debates and things like that, and gives to the state parties or gives to the national candidate. So they hold a lot of influence, right? And they take a lot of large donations from corporations and private interests. And usually they tend to use that money to fight against progressives when it comes to primary challenges. That's another thing, right? So now Bernie's plan would prevent corporations from donating to the DNC and related committees by doing an outright ban. This would codify a ban that Obama had actually had in place. This would make the ban official. Cannot reverse it. You are banned, if you're a corporation, from donating to the DNC. Love it. So now, other pieces of the plan would also include instituting a lifetime lobbying ban for national party chairs and co-chairs, banning chairs and co-chairs from working for entities with federal contracts that are seeking government approval for projects or mergers, or can reasonably be expected to have business before Congress in the future, banning advertising during presidential primary debates. I like that one. So that's in response, of course, to when you're having in the middle of the debate on CNN, for example, you're talking about healthcare, and then you have an ad, which, by the way, lies or puts out falsehoods or half truths. about Medicare for all, for example, which we had an example of. This would completely end that, and also would institute a lifetime lobbying ban for former members of Congress and senior staffers. So if you're a senior staffer, you're a congressman, and you're there, and you expect to afterwards get paid to land a sweet lobbying gig with maybe a place, a industry that you had some regulatory power over. Well, looks like you're not going to be able to do that. Bernie Sanders, not messing around. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.